All right, hello again, class. So, hopefully everyone had a chance to look at those ethical dilemmas that I posted on the discussion board. And the idea with that was to kind of get us thinking in the mode of ethics and seeing ethics kind of in everyday decisions. There's a right thing to do, a wrong thing to do, as it were. And so the way I had you go about it was beginning with the descriptive, right? Describing what you think you would actually do in that situation, right? Part of the point of this class is to be self-reflective. And so I wanted you to legitimately place yourself in those positions as much as you could and think, what would I actually do in that situation? Then secondly, the second part, what you should do, then is prescriptive, and then the why. So another way of thinking about this descriptive-prescriptive distinction is think about when you go to the doctor and you're not feeling well. So you go to the doctor and the doctor diagnoses what you have, right? He tells you, here's what you have. That's the descriptive. The prescriptive then, because the descriptive doesn't help you get better, that just tells you what you have. The prescriptive then is what helps you to get better. The prescription is the medication or the exercises or whatever it is. Hey, here, do this in order to get better. Now, if you choose not to do that, that's not really a fault of the prescription. That's fault lies with you for not taking the prescription. And so thinking again with regards to ethical terms, in ethics, the theories that we look at will be giving prescriptions. Look, we're ethically sick. To be ethically better here, take this prescription. Use this theory instead. If we choose not to use that theory, if we choose not to take that medicine and then continue to be ethically sick, that's not a fault of the theory. That's a fault of us for not taking the theory, for not taking the medicine. Now, a possible legitimate criticism of some of them could be, no one can do this, right? That could be a legitimate criticism, right? No one can take this medicine is different than no one would take this medicine. No one can live by this theory is different than no one would live by this theory. No one can would be a legitimate criticism of the theory. No one would is more about us than it is the theory itself. So I wanted to draw that distinction. And most of the theories we talk about will include both. It will say, here's what people do, here's what people should do instead. Here's how people actually act, here's how they should be acting. We'll get to that in just a minute when I turn to Plato. Second point of background stuff as far as ethics goes. Prior to 1970, give or take, the early 1970s, it was presumed that there was a distinction between things that had to do with ethics and things that had nothing to do with ethics. Okay? Things that have to do with ethics can be either ethical or unethical, right or wrong. Things that have nothing to do with ethics, those types of questions are anethical, A-N-E-T-H-I-C-A-L, anethical, nothing to do with ethics whatsoever. That's different than unethical, right? Anethical is, see, this is difficult to come up with an example because post-1970, that distinction between ethical and unethical began to be called into question. And later on in the course, we'll talk about who it was that brought that to the forefront. Such that now, post-1970, that presumption is questioned. So perhaps there are still things that are ethical and things that have nothing to do with ethics, or perhaps everything has something to do with ethics. Perhaps every decision is really an ethical or unethical decision versus unethical. Back in the day, prior to the 1970s, it was presumed that something like your chosen profession had nothing to do with ethics. Your choice of clothing had nothing to do with ethics. Your choice of breakfast had nothing to do with ethics. But post-1970, many people will say, not everyone, but many people will say, no, those things have ethical ramifications too. Those things should be the opportunity to think about your ethical theory that you're living out. So we'll talk more about that as we turn toward the second half, the more applied ethics. But it's something to keep in mind because the theories that we look at all were birthed, they all have their origin prior to 1970. So all of them will presume that there's a distinction between things doing with ethics and things that have nothing to do with ethics. Okay? And so now I want to begin talking about the blueprint for ethical discussions. Okay? And for the blueprint, I'm going to reference Plato, and primarily in the Republic, which is Plato's kind of masterwork, he gives a particular way of discussing ethics, okay? And I'm starting with Plato for somewhat arbitrary reasons, somewhat non-arbitrary reasons. So I'll give the non-arbitrary reasons first, because we have the complete work. We have everything Plato wrote. Prior to Plato, all we have are fragments. And so we have a sentence here, a sentence there, a paragraph here, a paragraph there, that may or may not be indicative of that particular worldview or philosophical view or ethical viewpoint. We're not sure, because we don't have the rest of it. We don't have the context. If I were to rip a few sentences out of your diary, journal, blog, however it is that you go about recording your life now, if I were to rip out a few pages or a few paragraphs, that may or may not necessarily be reflective of where you are philosophically and ethically. So we want to look at the complete works. Another legitimate reason, a non-arbitrary reason for beginning with Plato, is that given the way that Plato wrote, he wrote in dialogue form, it allowed him the opportunity to not only put forth his own philosophy, but also literally engage in conversation with competing philosophies, that these were the other characters entering into dialogue with his philosophical viewpoints. Okay? And so because of that, then he kind of sets the scene and sets the stage for philosophy to follow, right? He gets to be the one to write the blueprint that everyone else then has to kind of fit into, okay? Arbitrary reasons for starting with Plato, it's a good place to start, right? It's kind of additional background rather than just diving right into a theory. Hey, let's talk about utilitarianism or something along those lines. Let's continue to get our bearings here, right? Let's look at the blueprint and why that is the blueprint. Now, when I'm doing Plato, I'm only using Plato for the descriptive. I'm not using Plato for the prescriptive because, quite frankly, his prescription falls short. And I'll talk about why in a little bit. But in order to talk about Plato, I first have to talk a little bit about Socrates. And so Socrates was Plato's mentor. And Socrates was this fellow who went around the marketplaces of Athens and basically accosted the young noblemen of the time. These young men who were being trained in the art of rhetoric, who were being trained to become the future leaders of the city-state of Athens. And I'll do this occasionally. Sometimes I need to set the scene, the philosophical scene more generally, so that we can see how the ethics fits. Okay, I'll try not to any more than I need to. This is not intro to philosophy, this is intro to ethics, but occasionally it helps to kind of paint more of the picture so that we can put it in context. And so Socrates would go up to these gentlemen and ask them seemingly simple questions such as, what is truth? What is goodness? What is beauty anyway? Because these young noblemen, being trained in the art of rhetoric, were using these phrases and using these terms as if they knew what they were talking about. They were using them in order to persuade people into thinking they knew what they were talking about so that they could then get elected to office and so forth. Thankfully, things have changed a lot since ancient Greece. Stuff like that never happens today, especially not here in 21st century United States. I mean, if you're using the words, clearly you know what you're talking about nowadays. Anyway, and so in these conversations then, Socrates would merely ask questions. What do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? Clarify this for me. Socrates famously said he knew nothing. And so he was wanting these young noblemen who were being educated to teach him. And Socrates would never put forth his own answers, just ask questions. These questions then were forcing these young men to think for themselves instead of just parroting back what their teachers tell them. This then becomes the Socratic method of education. Teacher asks questions, getting you to think, rather than here are all of the answers, write them down, in a few weeks, give them back to me in a test form. Right? That's not the type of education Socrates was about. Not really the type of education Dr. Shrapi's about either, quite frankly. So, getting these people to think for themselves. Now, thinking's dangerous. Free thinking, critical thinking is dangerous because it could call into question the status quo. It could completely overthrow the status quo. Thinking is dangerous, all right? And so, just by being a teacher of philosophy, I am already somewhat subversive because I want you to think for yourselves. That's dangerous because I don't know what you might think. Right? I don't tell you what to think. And so, eventually then, Socrates has upset enough powerful families that they have him arrested and put on trial for corrupting the youth. Again, this was a very litigious society, very unlike ours. Corrupting the youth. And so, at his defense was, you're welcome. If by corrupting the youth, what you mean is getting them to think for themselves, then yes, that's exactly what I'm doing, hopefully. And you as Athenians should want that. Otherwise, you'll have non-thinking people running this place, and Athens will fall. It will no longer be great. What makes us great is the fact that we are run by thinkers. Thinking critically, thinking creatively. And so if you get rid of me, you're getting rid of something that's necessary for us to continue to be good and successful. And so, not surprisingly, he was found guilty because he said, yes, if that's what you mean by corrupting the youth, then yes, that's exactly what I'm doing and you're welcome. He was found guilty because that's exactly what he meant by corrupting the youth, right? And so he was found guilty. The punishment for corruption of the youth in ancient Greece was execution. And that story appears in the Apology written by Plato. Plato, a follower of Socrates, and Plato was the scribe of the group. He was the one that was recording conversations that were taking place. Most scholars agree the early Platonic dialogues probably actually historically took place. There are various accounts of this trial of Socrates. The Apology is one of them. But this whole incident really changed Plato, as you can imagine. It was very formative. And it influenced then his own philosophy and the way he views ethics. One thing that Plato noticed was that most people are not able to distinguish appearance from reality. What Socrates was doing was different than what the other teachers were doing. It was more valuable. It was better. And yet, most folks couldn't tell the difference. Looks the same, therefore must be the same. And Plato thinks there is a distinct difference between appearance and reality. And that'll come out in his ethics here as well, which I'll get to in a few minutes. That then also led him to be very, very skeptical of most folks. Plato is an elitist. Not everyone can see the difference between reality and appearance. Most folks just see the appearance and presume that to be reality, and that's not the case for Plato in his metaphysical system. You're just seeing my head. That's really weird. You should at least see my tie. It's a pretty sweet tie. I like bow ties. My wife is anti-bow tie. I don't know what her deal is. She thinks it's for clowns and little kids. Bow ties are cool. All right, so now you can see my tie also. So the second part of this story, this Socrates trial, put on trial, found guilty. So now he's on basically the ancient Greek equivalent of death row. And his followers come to him and they're like, hey, look, you got a bum deal, right? You got a bum rap. We know you're good for Athens. You know you're good for Athens. They don't recognize it. They're dumb. They only see appearances, whatever. So we think we can probably get enough money together to get the guard to look the other way for a while. Take a long lunch break so that you can escape, flee, get out of Athens. Go, live. Socrates says, I appreciate it, fellas. And obviously Shrapi's paraphrasing all of this. He says, I appreciate it, fellas, but here's the thing. I knew what the possible consequences were. I knew that this was a possibility for me. And if I had a problem with the laws of Athens and so forth, I should have left long before now. By staying, I have implicitly agreed to the social contract and the rules of Athens. So I appreciate it, but I would rather die as a just man than live as an unjust man. And so notice, right here in this dialogue, in this conversation, ethics comes to the forefront, right? Better to die and be good, or live and be bad, or evil, just and unjust. And so I should make clear as well, for our purposes, I'll be using the terms just, ethical, moral, interchangeably. I have yet to see, including our textbook, I have yet to see a good distinction be drawn between ethics and morality that does not already skew the discussion. And so rather than skew the discussion one way or the other, to make this a true introduction to, I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. Okay? And justice is the same thing as well. So, a lot of stuff Plato's dealing with here. And that plays in then to the way that he views ethics and the way that he thinks most people view ethics. In the Republic and other middle and late dialogues, Plato continues to use the character of Socrates. However, suddenly now Socrates has a lot to say. He's not merely a question asker. He's answer put forwarder. That was awkward, but you know what I mean. And so scholars disagree. Some scholars think, well, Socrates probably had some type of secret knowledge that he was giving to his followers. And so this is probably Plato then saying the things that Socrates would have said. Others think, no, he's using the familiar character of Socrates to give voice to Plato's own philosophical positions. Shrapi happens to be of the latter school, but that's neither here nor there, really. So in the Republic, then, the Socrates character at least having a conversation with Glaucon, and the discussion of ethics comes up. Now, the larger framework of the Republic is, what's the ideal political state? But in order to talk about the ideal political state, you must also talk about things like economics, the role of art, ethics, so on and so forth, right? Because all of this is necessarily a part of the ideal state. Right? And so the ethics discussion then begins such, and this is, again, from Plato's Republic. It's not in our textbook, sadly. Plato's Republic, starting around line 357, 358. Let me ask you now, how would you arrange goods? Are there not some which we welcome for their own sakes, and independent of their consequences? Seems reasonable. That there are some things that are good and valuable in and of themselves, regardless of results, regardless of the consequences. Okay, so that's one type of good, one classification of goods. Is there not also a second class of good, which are desirable not only in themselves, but also for their results? So good in and of themselves, and also for the results that ensue. Seems reasonable. And is there not also a third class, which are good only for the sake of some reward or result which flows from them? Sure. Why not? So you have things that are good in and of themselves, things that are good in and of themselves and results, and then things that are good only for the results. So the question then becomes, well, which one of those classifications encapsulates ethics? Where does justice fall in there? Goodness. And I'll pause that story to back up and give you just a little bit more metaphysical background for Plato. And it's piggybacking off the appearance-reality distinction. The things that we see about us, the things that we experience in the world, are merely copies. Appearances, sort of copies of eternal things, eternal unchanging things, eternal unchanging ideals. Let's call them forms. The form of beauty, the form of goodness, the form of truth. Beauty, from Plato's perspective, Plato thinks that beauty does not change. Beauty is this eternal, unchanging thing. And what happens then is that different societies, different people don't have different understandings of beauty. Instead, they really disagree as to what more closely adheres to the form of beauty. That may change over time, particular instances of things that are beautiful. Because the form doesn't change. But here again, just like most folks don't see the distinction between appearance and reality, most folks never have access to the forms. All they ever have access to are these copies, the appearances, the way the world appears to be. Beautiful things, but never beauty itself. Good things, but never goodness itself. True things, but never truth itself. There's an exception, however. There are a few folks who at least have the opportunity, the potential to have an experience of these forms. And I'm being very precise here in my language. Forms are not seen. What's seen are things, in the world of appearance, quite literally. Instead, what happens is, and I don't want to get too much down the road of intro to philosophy, but instead what happens is your soul understands and perceives forms. It's not an intellectual thing either. The intellect even is a bit beneath. It's the soul that understands and perceives the forms. Now, how does the soul go about doing that? Well, souls kind of fall into 4 different classifications or types of souls for Plato. There's the guardian soul, which is really great at taking care of people. Nurses, soldiers, preschool teachers. Really good at taking care of. There's a type of soul that are artists. Really good at making stuff. There's a type of soul that's really good at selling things, the merchant. And none of those souls are equipped to have this epiphany experience of the forms. There's a 4th class. This 4th class is the born philosopher. Now, the born philosopher is not born with access to the forms. Instead, the born philosopher, through a certain type of education, the Socratic method type of education, questions rather than answers, that may awaken their soul such that they have, boom, an experience of the forms. Aha, I got it now. Sadly, once they got it, they can't explain it because that then cheapens the form because now you're appealing to the intellect through words. But they at least have it now. They have this epiphany of the forms, including the form of goodness. Now, given Plato's elitist leanings, it would seem that he would want to place goodness in that class of things that are good in and of themselves, right? Being good for goodness' sake, to quote the song about Santa Claus. The proper motivation, the proper intention here. But if he were to do that, then only the born philosopher, after having the epiphany experience, would even be able to be ethical. And Plato wants to give everyone the opportunity to be ethical. And so Plato compromises and says that justice is in this middle class. It's good in and of itself and for the results. Now, throughout this course, the theories that we talk about, Shirapi at least has identified kind of 4 major tipping points with regards to all of these ethics. One of these tipping points is it based upon results or based upon intentions? Okay, so I'm going to reference one of the examples from the discussion board. Grandma in the ugly sweater. If, let's say it's Christmas, and Grandma gives me the ugly sweater, and she asks, what do I think about it? I may intend to be honest with Grandma. You know, Grandma, I love you dearly. I appreciate the effort you put into it, but it's really itchy and it just doesn't look that great. It's just not my style. It's not really my thing. Okay. Now, I'm not meaning to hurt Grandma's feelings. My intention is honesty, not intention to hurt Grandma's feelings. But Grandma's feelings may be hurt anyway. And so Grandma goes back to her room and cries, and I've now ruined Christmas. My intention was not to ruin Christmas, but that's the result. The question ethically then is, am I on the hook? Is it my fault? Am I to blame for the for Christmas being ruined? Is it about the result? Or am I to be blamed or praised only for that which I intended? I intended to be honest. Therefore, it's not my fault Grandma's crying. That's Grandma's fault she's crying, not mine. Plato here is saying, no, it's and both, which sounds fantastic. That'd be great if that were the case. I've read way too much philosophy in my life. Continue to read way too much philosophy in my life. I teach ethics classes at 2 different colleges and have been teaching at this one for over 10 years, and the other one for over 6. And both would be great, and yet I have yet to see a successful and both. Because at some point, the intentions and the results may not match up. And so you got to choose one or the other. That's going to be one of these tipping points. Some of the theories we look at are going to be based upon intentions. Some are going to be based upon results. Another one of these tipping point questions. With regards to ethics, should we be asking ourselves certain questions such that it's based in reason, figuring out the ethical thing to do, or is reason part of the problem rather than the solution? I should be turning reason off. I should be resorting to some type of intuition or feeling or gut or heart or something along those lines instead. Is it reason or feelings that should be determining? Again, and both sounds great. Good luck. Good luck. Because again, at some point these are going to conflict and you've got to rely on one or the other. Third tipping point. Who determines what's ethical anyway? Is it society? So we just go out and take a poll to determine what's ethical? Just ask the society and they'll tell you majority rules? Or is it something else? Something I'll call meta-societal. Something beyond society. Could be this individual. Could be a God thing. Maybe we'll talk about that later. Could be God. Could be something else, but something that's not society. And again, they conflict sometimes. The fourth one then is, are we talking about the entirety of a person with regards to ethics? Ethical people, unethical people, good people, evil people? Or are we talking about particular actions? People who screwed up this time. People who did great this time. People who were ethical in this situation, people who were unethical in this situation. Entirety of the person or particular actions. Plato's real point in writing this bit on ethics is not to support and both. The real thrust of his argument is to discredit results only. He thinks that's what most people think about ethics. That most people are ethical for the results. So he has a thought experiment. the ring of Gyges. And this ring, it's a ring that, so I'll just show my wedding ring here. It's a ring that when you put it on, you're invisible. It's like Lord of the Rings without the ring wraiths. You put it on. Although this ring isn't necessarily inherently evil like the ring from Lord of the Rings is. Because it has Sauron in the ring, right? It's sort of the embodiment of Sauron. Anyway, sorry, I started rewatching it with my kids. Rewatching for me, my kids, my 12 and 14-year-old, they're first watching. So anyway, so with this ring, you become invisible, not the wed. You become invisible. Now, what would you do with that kind of power? So I just want you to think. I'm going to actually shut up for a minute or two. I want you to think about the first 5 to 10 things that you would do with that kind of power. The power to be invisible, which means the power to not get caught doing whatever it is that you're going to do. The power to be beyond law and public opinion, because nobody knows it's you. But you're probably a good person. So don't think about what you would do with that kind of power. The power, Plato says, to be like a god among men. That's what this invisibility would give you, the power to be like a god among men. Think not about what you would do. Don't even think about what your friends would do. Think about what you think most people would do with that kind of power. Think about the first 5 or 10 things you think most people would do with that power. Think about how far down the list you would have to go. 15, 20, 30, before coming across anything that's ethical. To quote Plato, no man, and by man here he means mankind, not just the gender, no man can be imagined to be of such an iron nature that he would stand fast in justice. No man would keep his hands off what was not his own when he could safely take what he liked out of the market, or go into houses and lie with anyone at his pleasure, or kill or release from prison whom he would, and in all respects be like a god among men. Humanity sucks. We're all selfish. We all would do whatever we would want to do, and it would be evil stuff if we were invisible, if we had that kind of power. Think about what happens on the freeway when there's no highway patrol around. And contrast that with when there is highway patrol around. Do people change their actions? I can usually tell because people start hitting taillights when the highway patrol's around. Well, I guess I can't speed today after all because I'm not invisible. Because I don't have a ring of Gyges. I don't have that kind of power. I might get caught. I know I at least have heard this. Perhaps you've heard it as well. Perhaps even you've said it. It's only illegal if you get caught. This the getting caught part that prevents you from doing stuff that you otherwise would. If you were powerful enough, if you had a ring of Gyges, you'd be doing a whole lot of other stuff. because you knew you couldn't get caught. Which Plato thinks proves his point, not only that humanity sucks, but also that it's all about appearance. It's not about reality. It's about literally acting ethically rather than being ethical. Because if you actually were ethical, it wouldn't matter if you were invisible or not. You would still do the right thing, the just thing, the good thing. If you're doing it only because you might get caught otherwise, then you're merely acting. You're pretending to be ethical. You aren't actually. Let's think about this a little bit more, this ring of Gyges thing. Okay? Plato wrote this in 300 BC. That was quite some time ago. He had no way of knowing that we have rings of Gyges. The internet. Right? You can pretend to be whomever you want on the internet, and no one's going to find out. At least you don't think they will. Perceived anonymity counts as the ring of Gyges as well. And look how people treat one another. Cyberbullying and so forth. When people think they're anonymous, look at how they treat one another. Look at the things that they do when they think they're anonymous. Look at natural disasters. Now, granted, there may be some people out there helping other people, but there are also people who take this as an opportunity to go loot and to steal. Why? Police are otherwise occupied. They're not worried about me taking this TV from Best Buy. Now's my chance. Now's my opportunity. Taking advantage of a situation. It's like I have a ring of Gyges. It's so sick and twisted. Doesn't mean it's wrong. Doesn't mean it's incorrect. And so you need to be thinking, wait, is humanity really that awful? Would I also, if I had that kind of power, do those types of things? Because Plato says no one would keep his hands off what was not his own. It's really that bad? People really aren't ethical after all? I don't know. I think I'll stop this video here. No, I'll keep going. Never mind. I'm going to keep going. This stuff's good. We're right in the middle of it now. Think about what some of your friends, maybe you have better friends than I do, so I think about my friends. If it's a typical Ohio winter, and it's cold, and it's snowy, and it's icy out, and I have to go to the grocery store. So I go to the grocery store. Now, the grocery store has done all that they can to clear the sidewalks as best they can, but you can only do so much in the winter, right? So I hit a patch of ice, bam, and slip and fall and hurt myself. I have people in my life who are going to say, Dr. Schropp, you got a great opportunity, man. You should take advantage of this chance. And do what? Sue the grocery store. You're little old you, an adjunct, still driving a gray Ford Taurus. Here's your chance to get that McLaren Spider. Sue the big box grocery store, man. They got plenty of money. Even if you don't win the lawsuit, they'll win a plea so that they don't have to put it out in the, public relations and so on and so forth. Now's your chance. Well, yeah, but I was running. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Nobody needs to know that. Nobody needs to know. You don't need to take any responsibility here, man. Nah. Nobody knows but you. Nobody else saw what happened. So go ahead. Take advantage. Just like the freeway when there's no highway patrol around. You're not going to get caught. So go ahead and do what you can. Cheating. If you can cheat and get caught, why wouldn't not get caught? Why wouldn't you? The reason you don't cheat is because you're afraid you'll get caught. You know that you're not actually powerful. You know you don't actually have a ring of Gyges. Think about how we presume, many of us, that people in power have done unethical things to acquire that power and will continue to do unethical things to hold on to that power. We all know what George Orwell said. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. This is the ring of Gyges. This is power. The power to be like a god among men. Plato goes on at the end of that paragraph. Why is this the case? Because all men believe in their hearts that injustice is far more profitable to the individual than justice is. You're better off being unjust than you are being just. We all know it. The reason we don't do it is because we're afraid we'll get caught. Lance Armstrong. Oh man, look how awful things turned out for him. They were really good for a really long time. This notion of getting caught and this notion of laws, I need to say something about that as well. Because Plato explains that. And again, he's doing the descriptive here. He's explaining what is the case and why that's the case. So, if we all know in our hearts that injustice is better than justice, why are we not more unjust to one another? He says, oh man, I lost my page here. Here it is. Sorry about that, class. They. And anytime he's talking about they, he means most folks, most people, the common view, the common understanding, the majority. Remember, the people who already don't understand the difference between appearance and reality. Right? Most folks say that to do injustice is by nature good. Right? It's good for me. If I perform injustice upon you, it's good for me. That makes my hand look really big. Sorry about that. That's creepy. Okay. If I perform injustice upon you, that's good for me. It really sucks for you. But it's good for me. It's good for the individual who's performing the unjust act. That's why I perform the unjust act. That's why I cheat, is so that I can win. Does it then suck to be you because you're not winning? Sure, but that's what you get for following the rules. We'll talk more about that later on this course as well. To do injustice is by nature good for the individual, but to suffer injustice is evil, right? If I'm the recipient of injustice, that's evil. That's not good for me. That's horrible for me. So I'm weighing these two options, and I compromise. The evil that I could suffer is greater than the good that I could get away with. So he goes on. Hence there arise laws and mutual covenants. Frequently when people find out I teach ethics, then they start suddenly wanting to talk about the law. And I say, whoa, 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 hold on, time out. I don't teach law, I teach ethics. These things are two separate things. They may sometimes butt up against one another, but they're not the same thing. Another thing to think about. This is another ethical dilemma, an ethical scenario. Imagine that you are the driver of a trolley. Now that's ridiculous. I know it's ridiculous. That's the part of the point of the experiment. It's part of the point of the dilemma, is the ridiculousness of it. Because it's never going to happen, right? By making it so ridiculous, then, you can actually stop, since you'll never find yourself in that situation, and think about, wait, why is this the right decision? Why is this the should? Okay? Because the problem with so many of those dilemmas I gave you in the discussion board, where you could actually find yourself in those positions. And once you're in that position, it's too late to step back and think, wait, what's the right thing to do here? You're already caught up in the what I'm going to do. So this example gives that removal and that distance. And this is the trolley problem, most famous example in all of ethics. Television shows about it. Everything from brain games and mind to feel, I think it is, that you can find on the YouTubes and the computer devices. An episode of The Good Place is based upon this. Multiple books and articles have been written about this. And so I want you to think, okay, you're driving a trolley. And the hypotheticals, again, are ridiculous. You got to go with me here. Okay? It's got to be set up with certain parameters in order to be effective as an ethical dilemma, okay? So you're driving the trolley. And where the bit of track that the trolley is set to go upon has 5 people working on that bit of track. And you can't blow the horn, they're not going to hear it, they can't hear the train coming, you can't holler out the window, none of that, okay? So if you do nothing, you're going to kill 5 people with this train. But you do have the opportunity to turn the train in another direction. Unfortunately, if you do that, you kill one person because there's a person over there as well working on the track. And so this trolley example then forces you to think, okay, do nothing, 5 people die. Do something, 1 person dies. What is the right thing to do here? What should I do here? That's the initial premise, the initial setup of the trolley problem. So that usually requires quite a bit of thinking about. And for the most part, I won't talk too much about death in this class. I'm going to try to keep it more everyday examples, like the examples I gave you in the discussion board. The trolley example is a bit of an outlier. Okay. So hopefully you're thinking about what you would do, what you should do, and why. Now I'm going to change it slightly. You're still driving the trolley, still 5 track workmen, but the one on this bit of track is not a track workman anymore. Now it's your mom instead. And so you need to think, wait, does that change what I would do? Does it change what I should do? And so if nothing else, this class should give you good stuff to discuss with your friends and family. So you can tell mom, hey mom, I saved you today, but I killed 5 track workmen to do it. Or, hey mom, I ran over you with a train today, in my head of course, but I saved 5 people in doing so. Mom would be so proud, I'm sure, whichever decision you make. And so think for a few moments about whether the fact this is your mom does/should change anything about the decision. Then we should think about this. Instead of you being the driver of the trolley, instead you're seeing this whole thing play out from a bridge above. So you have no control over what the trolley driver decides to do. Still 5 track workmen, still your mom, and you're seeing all this happen. Thankfully, on the bridge with you is a very, 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 very fat man. A man so fat in fact that if he happened to fall onto the tracks, he would die, but the 5 track workmen and your mom would all be saved. Do you push the fat man? If you're worried about, I'm too small, I'm not strong enough, I can't do it, it's about leverage. This guy's probably leaning over the bridge watching this whole thing happen anyway. One little bump and over he goes. And it's at this point that frequently I'll have students say, wait, well, I get charged for murder. And I say, whoa, wait, I'm not worried about the law. The law and ethics are separate things. I'm asking about what you should ethically do. If you want to equate the law with ethics, which Plato says we do, because of this, we do this because we enter into these compromises, we enter into these social contracts, into these agreements because of fear. I'm afraid you might try to take my stuff, so I convince you to enter into an agreement with me where you agree not to take my stuff, I agree not to take your stuff, boom, mutual covenant. Boom, initial law, boom, the beginnings of civilization and social contracts. And we just get more and more people to buy into the social contract thing. Hey, we won't take your stuff if you don't take our stuff. Sweet, we're all cool here. Okay is okay enough. That then becomes the law, such that these laws and mutual covenants arise, and that which is ordained by law is termed by them, termed by most people, lawful and just. That we then conflate these two things. That which is ethical is that which is legal. That which is unethical is that which is illegal. Careful with that line of thinking, and I'll end here because I want you to be thinking a little bit more about this. Then we'll get back to Plato for next time, because he's got more thought experiments and more examples, and I want you to be thinking, wait, is Plato right here? Or is Plato off of his rocker? I want you to think about laws, and if they're the same thing as ethics, you then have to say things like, Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was unethical. He broke the law. That was the point. That's why he got put in prison. He broke the law to point out the injustice of the law itself. But that was the law. So if the law is the same thing as ethics, you're telling me he was unethical. The ethical thing to do would have been to follow the law. Let's talk about silly laws, because that one's a bit heavy. If law and ethics are the same thing, then you're telling me it is unethical to walk around with an ice cream cone in your back pocket. You can look it up. It's illegal in almost every city in the United States, at least. Is it a bad idea? Yes. Is it a waste of ice cream? Yes. Is it illegal? Yes. Is it unethical? And if you're curious about the impetus of that law, it's horse thieves who could claim that they didn't steal the horse merely followed them because of the ice cream cone in their back pocket. It was a loophole. One of my favorite silly laws is in the city of Chicago. It is illegal to fish while sitting atop a giraffe. It's illegal. Do we want to say it's unethical? Illegal. Illegal in the city of Columbus to purchase cornflakes on Sundays. It's not enforced, but to the best of my knowledge, it's still technically on the books. Technically, it's still on the books. Why? Because cornflakes were manufactured in the same plant as alcohol, and it goes back to the old blue laws, where you can't buy alcohol on Sundays. We would say it's unethical to buy cornflakes on Sundays in Columbus? Unethical? That's way heavier. So one should be thinking about this relationship between law and ethics, and if there really is a relationship, or if they really are separate things, such that it doesn't matter ethically if you push the fat man or not. There may be legal ramifications. There may be legal ramifications for turning the train and hitting your mom. There may be legal ramifications for not turning the train and hitting the other 5 people. I'm talking about ethics. And there's a distinction here. And also continue to be thinking about this ring of Gyges thing, and if that actually demonstrates what Plato thinks that it does, that we all merely act ethically. We pretend to be ethical rather than actually being ethical. And I'll have some questions posted on the discussion board, and I'll see you next time.